Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight and welcome to our third Women of Wisdom event of 2021. It is my pleasure to introduce Michelle Landau, Women's Philanthropy President.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Tonight is the third and final session of our 2021 Women of Wisdom series, Women's Health at Every Stage. And we are looking forward to an open discussion where we can talk women to women, have an honest conversation about ourselves and our bodies, everything you've ever wanted to know about our health and personal wellness issues. I recommend putting your video Zoom setting on speaker view. Thank you so much to our WOW committee who have helped put together our Women with Wisdom series. Thank you to Sharon Altman, Dory Eisenstein, Daryl Epstein, Carol Karansky, Nicole Levitt, Sidra Miller, Lauren Weiss, and our Women's Philanthropy Vice President, Heidi Cohen. And a special thank you to Women's Philanthropy Vice President Marcia Grosswald for pitching in tonight and speaking. The committee helped shape these programs to make them relevant and thought-provoking, truly a group effort. I also want to thank our generous corporate sponsors for their support. And of course, I also want to thank our Federation professionals. You all make these programs possible. This evening, we will hear from two incredible women, both who are renowned professionals within the fields of women's health, sexuality, and wellness. I know a Zoom room of smart women will have lots of challenging and smart questions, as well as some hot topics they want these experts to cover. So please don't be shy, and you will be able to put all of those questions in the chat later. Please note that the questions will only be seen by the speakers and co-hosts. Because of your generosity and support of the UJA annual campaign, our Jewish Federation is able to strengthen communities here in Greater Metro West, in Israel, and around the world. Working with our 22 local and overseas partner agencies, we are a safety net, providing services that assist families and the most vulnerable. Many of these agencies, such as our own 2 Jewish family service agencies and the Rachel Coalition, provide both mental health and emotional support to women and families in times of real crisis or need. Over $8.5 million in additional emergency funds has been raised and allocated this past year by our Federation to meet the challenges as a result of COVID-19. And right now, your support will be matched 1-for-1 up to $500,000. That's an additional $1 million for our community. That means today, you can immediately double your impact with any new or increased gift. Thank you again to those of you who continue to support the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. Your gifts and generosity are the engine that powers our community and all that we do. I would now like to turn this over to Nicole Levitt, who will introduce our speakers for this evening.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm honored tonight to introduce Rachel Braun-Shirl, a business builder, marketing strategist, speaker, author, and entrepreneur in women's health. As the managing partner and co-founder of Spark Solutions for Growth, Rachel works with multinational companies such as Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Bayer, and Pfizer, among others, to drive the growth of their brands and businesses. In addition, Rachel works with many venture-backed startups with an emphasis on women's sexual and reproductive health in the space from menstruation through menopause. In this space, Rachel serves on boards of directors and advisory boards. Rachel is a frequent speaker at leading universities, conferences, and companies on leadership, entrepreneurship, women in business, and the business of sexual health. Joining Rachel on our panel is Dr. Alyssa Dweck. Alyssa has been voted a New York Magazine top doctor and has over 25 years of experience as an OBGYN, delivered thousands of babies, and provided care to women of all ages. Alyssa is an accomplished author with a special interest and expertise in female sexual health. She has consulted and has served on numerous medical and advisory boards and is an assistant adjunct professor in the Department of Obstetrics Gynecology at New York Medical College. Please note that our speakers will not be dispensing any medical advice. We are thrilled to have them here tonight to have an open discussion and share with women of all ages information about their own unique health and sexuality matters. Rachel Braun-Scherl and Dr. Alyssa Dweck, I turn this evening over to you.
Thanks so much for the warm introduction. It's always weird hearing yourself spoken about. It's great to be here. There's so many familiar names and faces, and I'm delighted to be here and welcome to this community, my brilliant colleague and podcast co-host, Dr. Alyssa Dweck. Alyssa and I spend a lot of time speaking on a broad range of issues. Only one of us is a doctor. I'm sure you'll be able to figure that out. With that in mind, we want to make sure we're addressing the key interest areas of the people who join the call tonight. So before we get started, we wanted to take a quick 2-question poll. It's very easy. It'll show up on your screen to get a better sense of where you all are in your current life cycle, reproductive health and wellness journey. So the poll will appear on the screen, and just take a minute to answer the 2 questions. And then we'll take about 30 seconds to seriously analyze the results and then go. Maybe less than 30 seconds. Okay, I think we're good. It looks like we have a perimenopausal and menopausal over 45-year-old group for the most part. I'm sorry for the 45s and under, but we'll call you later and talk about your stuff. Please feel free to ask questions. And when we get to the Q&A, as everybody mentioned, only Dr. Dweck and I, as well as the committee, can see your questions. So hopefully that will take away any trepidation you have about asking a question. So it was a big intro, and apparently we have 30 minutes to tell you every single thing you need to know about sexual and reproductive health. So we'll either talk extremely fast or we won't cover all of it, but we'll do our best to cover some of the highlights. So just in the way of introduction, Alyssa and I came together through mutual events and connections in the industry. We frequently found ourselves on the same stage. And over time, we thought that combining our 2 perspectives, Alyssa's as a practicing clinician for over 20 years. And as the intro said, she's not only an OB-GYN, she's a surgeon, she's a business advisor, she's an author, she's a much sought after media expert. And I spend my time in the trenches on the business side of women's sexual and reproductive health. And I have to preface the conversation with a prediction. Literally every time Alyssa and I speak to an audience, people invariably come up to us at the end, will come up to her, obviously, at the end and say, oh gosh, I wish you were my doctor. Oh, she's in Westchester County. I wish I lived in Westchester County. And oh, if she's not my doctor and it's not convenient, I wish my doctor were just like her. So one of the things that makes this so fun for me to collaborate with Alyssa is she takes these very complicated concepts and makes them digestible and less overwhelming. So we'll jump into it. Alyssa, every day in your office, people are always asking you big questions like, am I going crazy? And we hear that often from menopausal women. What's normal sexual behavior in terms of the number of times couples have sex a week? What do I do about my diminished libido? I'm feeling overly emotional. So give us a sense of, on an average day, of which there are very few, I'm sure, what are the biggest questions that your patients continually ask, and what's some of the advice that you provide?
Right. So first, thank you so much, Rachel, for that lovely introduction. And it's wonderful to be here. You know, I think the biggest question that I get asked kind of translates into the "am I normal" question. Women want to know if their habits are normal. Are my menstrual habits normal? Am I bleeding too long, too short, too often, or too infrequent? When can I stop using birth control? Is it normal that my sexual drive has gone down this month, or maybe even this year, which I suspect is something that we will get into? As far as what's normal, what I usually like to answer is it's what's normal for you, because everybody has their own individual habits, whether it's their bleeding habits, their sexual habits, their lifestyle habits. And I think women usually know when something is off. And that's when I really want people to come in and talk to me about it so we can unpack that and see if there's anything really to worry about. Your question about, am I going crazy? I think I hear this 10 times a day, maybe even more.
And not just from me, right?
Not just from you, from everybody, because, you know, the perimenopausal time, and I'll just sort of explain what that is. Menopause is 12 consecutive months without your period for no other apparent reason, okay? But all those years leading up to that time are called the perimenopausal time, and this could last 10 years. And women often are physically uncomfortable with hot flashes, night sweats, lacking in sleep, their concentration may be off, they've got a million things going on in their lives. So yes, sometimes they do feel like they're going crazy because they're juggling so much and maybe not, up on their sleep and at the top of their game for the hormonal reasons that we will talk about.
One of the things we always hear when we're talking to people who are running menopause companies or people who are dealing with menopause, I'd love you to just share a moment, your perspective on the controversy and the ongoing discussion about hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, so, I have this conversation all the time with people because, even in my career of 25 plus years, the hormone popularity pendulum has swung multiple times. So a long while back, everybody took hormones. They were just the gold standard. Everybody felt great. Everybody was having great sex. And of course, they, attributed this to their hormones. And then came that WHI study, which I won't go into, but suffice it to say, it generally was a study that scared the life out of people with concerns about breast cancer, uterus cancer, and blood clot, amongst other things. So then hormone use took an abrupt nosedive. Now it's back on the radar again, but only right for the certain individuals. And that's something that we need to have a longer conversation about with our patients individually. So hormones are still in the picture. They're not for everybody, but many people do rely on them. And I will just make note, there are a lot of alternatives to hormone therapy for the symptoms that people suffer with. And it's a long conversation to have. One of the real developments that's been helpful for my patients is also the number of companies in the space of sexual and reproductive health who are offering not only products, but education, because the internet and even Google searches, it is the wild, wild west out there with information. And, how is someone supposed to know what's accurate and what's not accurate? Because there are so many myths out there. So some of these sites have really excellent content for education. Rachel, I would love you to talk about what are some of the most interesting ideas or solutions that you're seeing in the menopause space.
Yeah, thank you. So the education piece is really important. So I want to stop there. So you take where in the US, we have fewer than 50% of the states offer sex ed. And for those that mandate it, a subset of them don't require it to be scientifically accurate. So I'll say that again, because people are always stunned and think I'm making it up. In the states where sexual education is mandated in the US, it is not required necessarily that it be scientifically or medically accurate. So when you combine that with how uncomfortable the conversation is for young kids to hear from their parents and for parents to have with their children, and then you throw in the ubiquity of porn, we have people with all kinds of information, expectations, and often unrealistic expectations about what's out there. So the companies that are in this space, whether it's direct to delivery menstrual products or a menopause solution, so much of what they're doing is stepping in and providing some of that education. So when Alyssa and I are looking at a company or want to have someone on our podcast, she always first takes a look at the quality of the educational material and makes sure that it's right. It's not, from Joe's Bar and Grill Gynecology Center down the block. And many of the folks who I've spoken to on the before ask about many different products. So let's just take one, vaginal dryness. There are literally dozens and dozens of products in this space. So I've talked about a company called Pulse in the past. Some of you have seen that. And what that basically is a natural formulation that comes in a pod, think your Keurig coffee maker, and it is in a device that warms it up to a more appealing temperature as opposed to the experience that many of us have in the gynecologist's office. Not Alyssa's, I'm sure they warm it there, but at mine, it's freezing cold. That's an example. It depends what you're looking for. There are lubricants with CBD in them now, which people are having some success with. There are ones that are totally natural. There are ones that are fragrance-free. There's some that have fragrance. So just as Alyssa said, there's nothing that's normal. You have to figure out what works, and everybody's vaginal tissue is different, and you might not have a positive reaction or increased response to one that your friend uses. And there is a bit of trial and error in all these things. Many of you have children who I'm sure are still menstrual, obviously not in menopause. There are 6 or 7 very well-known direct-to-delivery menstrual health kits. And one of the things that they do, which is interesting, is instead of buying a box of whatever they were, super, so you have 17 super, 6 medium, and 2 light, you can actually create the box the way that you want. So it's not only are you getting the menstrual protection, but you're getting the products. And now there are menstrual cups that are natural, and everything you could think of exists. One of the things that's interesting that we've talked about recently that might impact some of the folks on the phone is, I think most of you have seen this direct to delivery birth control. And one of the things that's interesting about that, there's a couple things. First of all, we always point out that close to 50% of pregnancies every year in the US are mistimed or not ideal, not planned for, unplanned or mistimed. So what these businesses are doing is they're making sure wherever you are, your solution is with you. It's done through telehealth. You don't have to have a relationship with the doctor. You just have to find a service where they're certified to write prescriptions in your area. And one of the things that was interesting we were talking about yesterday is Alyssa was saying she practically has carpal tunnel at the end of her office hours, where she's literally answering call after call after call, filling birth control subscriptions. So that model is one of the ones that's beneficial to patients, but it's also freeing up the doctor to focus on things that really require her skill. It doesn't require her skill necessarily to call CVS and write a prescription. So in any category you can think of, incontinence, there are tons of devices. Happy to talk more. We don't, either of us, promote any particular company, but just know if you're looking and you're having trouble, reach out to me. I won't, and I can help you wade through some of the companies that at least I know about. So that goes back, Alyssa, to this idea about information. Often, almost every day probably, and I'm sure folks on the phone, I wish we could do another poll of how many people consult Dr. Google on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. So your patients come in, and I've talked about this before. I talked about it tonight. I've always talked about with you. I'm literally obsessed with how little sex education both children and parents have. So I'm curious, now that there is so much and not all of it is good, have your conversations changed with your patients, whether they're the younger patients who are just becoming sexually active or just getting their first period, or the mothers of those people, which, many of us are mothers of older children, or, we're even empty nesters. What are people hungry for when they come into your office in terms of information as it relates to that? And are there resources, information sources that you can recommend?
Yeah, so I think that there is definitely much more of a direct conversation going on without trying to, quote unquote, beat around the bush regarding subjects that may have formerly been more taboo subjects. I find the young women who come in, and I know we're all young on this call, but young women meaning, maybe millennial and younger, these people come in and they teach me things. They bring articles, they're searching the web and bring me things to decide whether they might be reputable sources and accurate bits of information. And I welcome this because every so often, there'll be something out there that I haven't heard about. I also find that there's a downside to everything that can be seen online. So for example, some of my really young patients are very busy comparing what they look like to what people on the internet look like, whether it has to do with grooming practices or what their labia should look like, or, this has taken things like weight and exercise to a whole new level because young women and some older women, but a lot of young women have these comparisons that are, things that we've never really had to deal with before. So really dispelling myths about what is normal anatomy, what are normal grooming habits, what are normal menstrual habits, are things that get discussed on an individual basis, but also a lot of reassurance has to be provided because not everybody is going to look like, the last model or porn star or whatnot that's been seen on the internet. So that's something that I'm seeing quite a bit. I find that many of the public schools, at least in the community where I practice, really have not upped their sexual and health curriculum to a point where I think it's helpful. I think surely there are some less mature teenagers and high schoolers and college students, but the really mature ones really could have learned about some of these sex ed issues in a more mature way. But I think what's great is that there's a big thirst for knowledge. People want to know what's normal, what's not. And, I welcome the conversation and then point them in directions and websites that are reputable, depending on what they're concerned about.
Are there any particular ones you could call out?
Well, look, ACOG, which is the American College or Congress of OBGYNs, has information that's reasonable for patients and for providers. So that's a reputable source and everything has been vetted. For my menopause population, I typically refer them to the NAMS, North American Menopause Society website. They have both consumer friendly, but also provider reasonable information. I think that, some of the more consumer-based websites like Mayo and Harvard Health Letter and some of those types of, really
Like light reading before you go to bed.
They put out, well, that's light reading, yeah, right.
Yeah.
They put out good information that's factual, vetted, and then for somebody who wants more intense resources or references, they are listed. Yeah. So Rachel, I am curious, how would you characterize the attitude that the medical community has as it relates to this huge broad category of our overall health and sexual health? Gynecology used to be full of a room of older white guys, and that is no longer the case. I think gynecology is now predominantly a women's field. So what kinds of conversations are happening in your world, keeping that in mind?
So one of the things that I've talked about a lot that's a challenge is, we use the word stigma and taboo, which you and I can't stand at this point because this is stuff we talk about all day. But one of the biggest issues that I think patients experience and consumers experience is they don't really have the vocabulary. And by that, I mean, when I got into the space, if you were Googling, which is quite a while ago at this point, if you were Googling, you would see porn and disease, like, oh my God, my vagina is falling out. And you didn't see anything in the middle. I'm kidding. I never really saw that. And most people want something in the middle, which is not extreme in either direction. And that didn't really exist. So what's been happening, one of the things that we see companies doing with the education, that's happening with the education is we're starting to have a vocabulary, and that's working a couple of different ways. First of all, at last count, as of this week, there are over 550 companies in this space of women's sexual and reproductive health. When if you looked even 3 years ago, it would have maybe been a quarter, if not 10% of that. So there are lots more people having conversations. There are lots more people trying to fight the Facebooks of the world who say, I'm sorry, you can't, we can advertise erectile dysfunction, but we can't advertise a product for vaginal dryness because that's too sexual in nature. And my answer is always, have you ever asked anyone if they had vaginal dryness, if that felt too sexual in nature? Because I'm pretty sure that is not one of the adjectives they would use to describe it. But now there's so many people, there's investors in the space. There are a lot of women in the space. 80% of the companies in the femtech, sex tech, and women's health space are women. So what is really happening is that this rising tide is raising all boats. So there are lots of companies talking about menopause, and then Forbes writes about menopause, and then Procter & Gamble buys an organic tampon company. And so all these things matter. It matters what consumers are reading. It matters what companies are telling them. It matters about the conversations physicians are having. And it also matters, what's in the news and what large companies are doing. And all of those things make it easier to have the conversation, but there is literally not a day that goes by where someone doesn't ask me in one format or another, why are these topics taboo? You know what? People don't like saying the word vagina. They don't like saying the word clitoris. They don't like saying the word vulva. We happen to be outliers in that. And at this point, it certainly for Alyssa, who's studied this and been practicing for a couple of decades, doesn't. And part of it is the just saying it and asking the questions over and over again till the words feel comfortable. Like when we hire people, I literally say, we talk about vaginas and vulvas. Is that going to be a problem? And if it is, it's not one that they're going to get over that quickly. And that just might not mean that they're meant for being in this space, because that's sort of the business that we're in.
Well, as you know, Rachel, I speak vagina.
Yes, every day.
Have loads.
Oh, now I can say I'm bilingual. I
Yes,
speak
you
English and
certainly
vagina. Okay.
Yes, I even have a vulva emoji keyboard on my phone. I just think that's kind of funny. But I will say these topics are becoming much more acceptable to talk about. And I think the number of people who come into my office saying, I'm having a problem down there, is diminishing.
I've always found this interesting, that there's a growing body of research that suggests that children who are provided with sex education about their genitals and what they're called, what the real names are for them, and what they're capable of and what they can do, increases their likelihood to report instances of trauma or assault. So I always say, if you can't find any other way into the conversation, it's about the kids. It really does help children have the language for some of these horribly traumatic things that people have to deal with. With the companies, so many companies, and I know you work with so many, and you're approached by even more than that. How is the medical community responding to sort of these companies helping them do their job, for lack of a better expression? Is it looked at as a benefit? Is this helpful? And I know you can't speak for all gynecologists, especially the old white men, but are you seeing a change in any of the discussions that are happening at these industry conferences or in the papers that are published about this sort of momentum, this tsunami of new companies?
I think I have more experience with how the patient population is accepting all of these new offerings. And I think that it's behooves most of us in the gynecology world to try to educate ourselves on some of the newer products, newer devices. I mean, after all, new drugs come out and we learn about them. New surgical procedures come out and we learn about them. These are over-the-counter products in many instances that you're speaking of that are just enhancing the quality of people's lives. So for example, you spoke about the menstrual hygiene products. So for all the people out there who have young girls who are menstruating or just starting menstruating, I have never seen something so well accepted and needed as menstrual panties, menstrual underwear. Girls used to travel with tampons literally placed up their sleeves to go to the bathroom in the middle of class because they didn't want anybody seeing this. Now menstrual underwear, you're caught by accident. It's not a disaster. And, this is a really big thing in a young tween or teenager's life. And enhances the quality of their life. When it comes to vaginal lubricants, because vaginal dryness is something that I'm seeing day in and day out, and in part it's because more people are speaking about it. We had everything from coconut oil-based products to hyaluronic acid-based products to hormone products in different forms, shapes, and delivery systems, and also other, more device-like techniques to help with dryness and uncomfortable intercourse. So yes, I'm thrilled that there's sort of a renaissance with all of these devices and products and awareness coming out, and it's helping my patient population.
And it certainly is causing corporate America to respond. So we had gotten a question before the event about, given how big menstruation is and that everybody menstruates, every woman menstruates, or someone who has the parts menstruates, there's been so little innovation and attention paid. And from my perspective, that's probably the area, that and infertility, where there's been the most discussion and the most advancement and the most options. I'm sure some of you have heard of things. I don't know if you've tried it, but this period panty, the company that created the period panty, companies like Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark, who always have had a monopoly on that, and nothing was innovated for 70 years. The biggest innovation in the last 70 years was adding the wings that could attach under your underwear on a pad. So these younger companies, and often started by younger women, are saying, you know what, that just doesn't work for me anymore. It doesn't work for me to hide my tampon in my sleeve, and it doesn't work for me to be unprepared in any aspect of my life. And so they're making choices. And now the large companies are also making their version of period panties. The difference is they're still made out of, the fibers that a pad is made out of. So when a customer has the option to choose underwear that feels like underwear, that can absorb 5 tampons worth of blood before you have to change them, and then you could rewash them, and sustainability, that's also become a big issue, versus this old fiber stuff that comes in this enormous package, on the shelf, which no one is still comfortable buying. The larger companies have to start taking notice, because many of them have not figured out how to speak to millennials about how things change.
So I want to, on that note, also make mention that there's a huge push towards organic products, whether it's menstrual products or undergarments. The environmental sustainability angle is huge, and we are all going to learn this from our children, I suspect. But some of the younger women that I see this is their primary purpose when they purchase a product, is whether it's hurting the environment or environmentally friendly. And in regard to the menopause space, since that's where our audience seems to lie, menopause is really lends itself beautifully to consultation on the telehealth platform. As much as we all love to see each other face to face, particularly when you're seeing a healthcare provider, this year has taught us that the menopause situation and symptoms and bothersome issues can be dealt with via telehealth. So a visit is not necessarily needed in person. We can speak about sexual health, we can talk about hormones, we can talk about alternatives to hormones, we can speak about hair changes, skin changes, joint changes, because this is mostly a conversation rather than relying on an examination. So that's another big thing that's come out of the innovation coffers.
So thank you for bringing it up. We would be remiss talking today about sexual health or women's health without talking about COVID. And you had mentioned early on some of the trends we're seeing. From the business perspective, we joke that women's health and sexual health is an overnight sensation that's been centuries in the making, and COVID has sort of brought it to light. And the positive part of that is that there's now more narrative around the idea that you can't just look at women's health as one piece. You can't look at sexual health without thinking about her mental health. You can't think about her cardiac health without her bone health. And part of that is because we're having these conversations where you see women literally juggling. They're homeschool teachers, they're working, they're caring for aging parents, they have a job, or they're caring for kids, whatever it is. So there's been the positive side for me of COVID is that there's a lot more communication and understanding about women's health. When it relates to what you said earlier about trends in behavior, what the sort of the research says is this is the business research, not the professional research, is that there's a big group of people who during COVID had more time at home, more time with their partners, more time for self-care. And so their sexual activity, however you define it, went up 30, 40%. On the other hand, there's a group of people who, their sexual activity essentially disappeared when you add, we're all now sheltered in place, people are losing jobs. There's a lot of, you talked about this, a lot of real anxiety that you're also seeing in your office. And I'm sure folks on the phone have experienced it around this time that we're living in. And so, there's a whole bunch of people who aren't saying, yippee, I'm home with my partner for 37 straight months. And I feel like, having a lot more sex. There are a lot of people also saying, oh my God, I can't even see straight. How am I supposed to think about anything else? There have been enormous increases in sales of sex toys and any kind of accoutrements or condoms. There was a worldwide condom shortage. I don't know if any of you were up nights worrying about that. There's just been this run on products for what I would call experimentation, and whether that's by yourself or with a partner, that's good, and that's creating a conversation. There was a study it was from Match that I was asked about recently, where they noticed that there's an increase in people who are roommates in platonic relationships who have now become sexually active. And so someone asked me, what did I think of that? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure that people aren't falling in love with their roommates in record numbers. I'm pretty sure it's about the fact that they're in your pod or where they've been. But there's so many new issues and questions like dating in this environment, which, even though we were billed as being able to go through every aspect of female health in 30 minutes, that's a whole nother piece that we didn't get to. What is safe, and how do you date in this space, and how do you advise your children if in fact they have any interest in hearing anything that you say? Before we switch to questions, we have a couple of questions in the audience. I'm curious if you could share the patterns you've seen in your office and on your telehealth calls in terms of the level of anxiety, how it compares to your patient population pre-COVID.
Absolutely heightened. I have never prescribed so many antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds. I have loads of women who have resorted to taking, CBD gummies at night to sleep. But I think things are looking up now. What I do know factually, the birth rate is down for like the third or fourth year in a row. Of course, this is not really reflective of COVID yet, but I suspect that next year we will see that even more. In my anecdotal experience, it seems like sexual activity has really diminished quite a bit, in part due to anxiety, in part due to that people are cooped up with their partners and they, maybe are even getting a little sick of them. But
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Really? And I also note that the whole, the self-care has become a thing, and that's great. So, whether it's, with hygiene or, sexual health or anything really involving gynecology, grooming, hygiene has become definitely much more on the forefront of people's minds.
Okay.
I will leave this portion with a little tidbit and fun fact. We saw tons of infections, irritations, rashes, all kinds of vulvar issues. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the shelves were empty with all of our normal products.
Wow.
So when you go on Amazon and you just order whatever toilet paper they may have or whatever tampon they
Like
might
the
have.
sandpaper special because they're out of Charmin.
Yeah, so this kept us busy in the gynecology
That's
world.
fine. It's interesting, how many different things connect. So we have some questions. The first one is absolutely for you. And it's from a person who said some folks are still apprehensive about IUDs, and it does seem to be that young women and millennials are switching to IUDs or long-acting reversible contraception. And I think there's some baggage from the IUDs of years gone by. Can you speak to the safety and efficacy of
Sure.
IUDs and their safety for moms on the phone who are concerned about that?
Yeah, so first, just by way of education, there's two kinds of IUDs. There is a hormonal IUD, and there are various varieties that contains progesterone only. These IUDs are excellent forms of birth control, but more than that, some of them actually help with heavy bleeding. They lower the rates of uterine cancer. They probably lower the rates of certain STDs. So that's important to know. They also help with cramps. The other IUD is a copper IUD, also phenomenal for contraception. However, periods may get a little heavier, longer, and crampier. These are not our mother's IUDs. And a lot of the concern comes because of the generational divide. The IUDs are not going to alter your fertility unless there's a problem. You get an infection, and there's various other things that could go on that are really kind of rare when you think about it. But there has been a huge push for using IUDs, particularly in young women who have not had children yet. And that goes against a lot of our grains from what we were taught in the past. But they are so great in preventing pregnancy, and they have really not increased any likelihood of fertility issues or infection or damaged uteri when push comes to shove. So there's a big push that these are even offered as first-line contraception for young women who have never had children, in the right person.
Okay. Is there a resource you'd recommend? I love this question. I always thought I'd be a cool mom who was totally open about talking about sex with my kids. And I'm here to tell you that someone who's tried forever talks about sex and everything all day long in front of my kids, they still have no interest. But the question is, how can you be open and provide a resource and have these conversations that are hard, wanting to be open, maybe more open than your parents were, if they even discussed it with you? Is there a book? Is there a class? Is there a something that you recommend to moms with teenage girls to start to have these conversations? And what is the right age to start having these conversations?
Yeah, the right age is going to really depend on your kids. So, I think most parents can feel that out. And you know what? I think that just being direct and factual to the best of your ability, whether it comes to anatomic terms or periods or contraception, euphemizing these terms is not going to be that helpful. So being direct helps. I will and I hope it's okay that I mention a book that I did co-write called The Complete A to Z for Your V. And I only bring it up in light of this question because it really is a user-friendly guide for everything gynecology that I see in my office over the years, appropriate for age, 8 to 80. And it's not threatening in any way. There are many books on Amazon that I think are written by stellar physicians meant for young teens. I would sort of look at that list and see what comes up. And then certain websites. So for example, again, with transparency, have nothing to do with these companies. Some of the tampon companies like Lola or like Cora, they have wonderful information and blogs and content regarding periods. That's a good place to send perhaps some of your young people to learn more about that. Even Thinks, the menstrual underwear company we spoke about, has great content. And I know that most of these places have their content vetted by physicians such as myself.
Yeah. I mean, most of them have advisory boards and medical advisors who go through all this. So, and one of the things that those companies have done is they've changed the tone of the conversation to try to make it more accessible. It's not that they're using euphemisms for body parts, but it's more conversational. And since so many of them, when they started their companies, were millennials, and now they're, you know, in their 30s, maybe, the conversation and the tone of it is very different. And there's, all of them have these, you know, how-to guides, how to feel, you know, how to feel good in bed, and how to know what is the right sex toy for you, and how to know what is the right tampon, and who to speak to in your state government if you want tampons and pads to be free in school. One of the other things that's so interesting, and maybe this is a way to get your teenagers interested, is these companies are also really focused on advocacy. So there's a couple of big issues that are taking place in menstruation. This idea called menstrual equity, that why shouldn't menstrual products be available? They serve you food when kids were going to school, they serve you food in school. Why should you have to pay for products that it's not your choice whether you need them or not? You need them. The other one is this idea of a luxury tax, that products for women are taxed at a higher rate than the exact same products for men. Obviously, tampons don't fit in that category, but think almost everything else. Shaving cream, hair care, whatever it is, the same product is more expensive. And then the last one is that there's many states that put a sales tax specifically on tampons. So these companies are really all fighting City Hall while they're providing information and also offering very high quality products.
I want to also mention, you know, any political affiliations aside, Planned Parenthood has wonderful information online that's accurate. They have, you know, nurse practitioners and gynecologists available to chat with on a live basis. So also a very reputable source of information. Here's
a fun one. 10 years from now, what will we look back on as the biggest advancement of the decade in the field of women's health?
Male birth control.
I was going to say Netflix. Oh, that's women's mental health. Okay. You know, that one's really hard. There's so much happening. It's not too sexy to talk about incontinence, but there are amazing devices that are being developed in incontinence. Historically, the conversation there was how many pads did you use? How many leaks did you have? Now we're talking about how can you improve the underlying symptoms and improve your confidence and improve your intimacy? You know, it's a much broader conversation. So if I were to say the biggest advancement would be this groundswell of companies creating this conversation. It's not any one technology or any one device. It's the fact that, you know, before I die, you'll be able to say the word vagina on TV.
I'm going to chime in.
My mom's on the phone, so she always wished for me that you know, I would set big goals and then try to achieve them.
I think precision medicine and genetics testing is going to be massive. You know, we already have the baselines for this, but genetics testing with, you know, precision medicine based on what your individual genetic makeup is going to be big.
I think that idea of customization is huge. We see it in hair care. We see it in vitamin selection. The idea that you could develop, and this just isn't women's health, this is, you know, universal health, that based on your DNA or based on your biome or based on how your body responds, you will be able to literally create products for yourself. You don't have to mix them in a lab, but you fill out a form or you do a couple of diagnostic tests, and then what you get back is something that was created for you. I think that's really exciting. Skincare companies have been trying to do that for a long time, and the science wasn't there, but now it's getting closer. Another question. Post-menopause, some of the symptoms this person has experienced: hair loss, eyelash loss, sagging skin. What do you recommend for those symptoms other than estrogen? That was the way the question was phrased. What do you recommend to really deal with those specific
Right. So,
challenges.
while these are common symptoms of menopause, it is important to rule out other medical issues that might be causing these symptoms, such as thyroid disease, which we see all the time, where you might have an overactive or an underactive thyroid, and it immediately affects your skin, your hair, and other parts of your makeup. So, getting things like those blood work and an exam checked out would be important. Once we know that there is no obvious medical problem going on and we can just blame your hormones, believe it or not, although anecdotally women will say estrogen makes them feel great, their hair is silky and shiny and thicker again, their skin is more supple. Estrogen is actually not indicated for that. We normally recommend vitamin supplements such as biotin for hair and nails. We often make sure there's no anemia, but definitely recommend an iron supplement if there's any chance of anemia. We're always looking for vitamin deficiency, specifically vitamin D, and replace that if necessary. Some women will turn to something like Rogaine, and that will help with hair growth. There are other supplements over the counter. One is called Nutrafol, one is called Viviscal. Again, these are small startups that really made it big in the hair and skin categories, so those might be something to consider. As far as skin becoming, saggier, as you put it, we lose collagen with age, and that is just something that is going to happen inevitably. However, moisturizing constantly, hydrating as well as you can, staying out of the sun or using sunscreen regularly, visiting a dermatologist to see if they have any other specific recommendations, particularly injections in places that you might be, specifically speaking about. And then there's always our friends, the plastic surgeons, who can make it better.
Which might be outside the scope of today's conversation. So a follow-up to the question about about multivitamins and vitamin supplements. The question is, do women really need to take multivitamins? Can they get away with, I guess the way that I'm reading the question is, are multivitamins okay, or do they need to be taking the individual iron supplement or vitamin D supplement?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in a couple of ways. There was one study a while back, I think it was even in the New York Times that reported it, that taking a multivitamin every day does not prevent death. Now, that's kind of a crazy broad statement, but the truth of the matter is, if you have a wonderful diet that is well-rounded, with all appropriate food groups represented, you probably don't need a multivitamin. With that said, I don't know anybody who really has the perfect diet, and it surely can't hurt to take a daily multivitamin, particularly one appropriate for women or a menopausal woman, which might have a little bit more vitamin D, a little more calcium, maybe a little more iron. And so you can check that out. What you don't need to do is take megavitamin supplements. And some people find that certain vitamins might upset their GI tract a little. So in that case, they can, pick and choose what is necessary for their cause.
Okay, we just got the high sign that there's one more question, and so we'll stay in skin and appearance. The question came in, what do you think about collagen and fish oil for skin or for any other health benefits?
Yeah, so in regard to fish oil, I mean, this is well known for help with heart health and optimizing heart health. Surely something that's thought about pre-pregnancy as well. Collagen is kind of new to the supplement field in the mainstream. Again, if you have a good diet with adequate protein, it's probably not needed, but can't really answer that in any more detailed of a way.
Okay. I think that's all we have time for. Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about stuff that we live and breathe every day. Hope that the information was helpful and useful. And if you have follow-up questions, a lot of the people on the phone know how to reach me. They're going to send an email out tomorrow. So I think Dr. Dweck will get a lot of new telehealth consultative appointments showing up on our calendar. But thanks so much for your time and attention.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Alyssa. Such a great discussion. Wow is appropriate. To hear more from our speakers, please check out their brand new podcast, the business of the V. I'm Marcia Grosswald, a Vice President in Women's Philanthropy, and I am delighted that we were able to bring you this Women of Wisdom educational series. The topics and speakers were so thought-provoking and relevant, and hopefully provided us all with practical tools and knowledge. We are very happy that you were able to join our Women's Philanthropy evening. You may not know that our Greater Metro West Women's Philanthropy campaign is made up of over 5,000 generous, philanthropic, and like-minded women with shared values who want to make an impact in our community. Our women represent 1/3, or approximately $8 million of our annual UJA Greater Metro West campaign. And it's because of all your support that we are able to provide programs like these and offer assistance to those in need in our community. Thank you again. Community Mitzvah Month is now in full force, and we have an incredible array of volunteer opportunities for the whole family. Our Center for Volunteerism has put together several meaningful opportunities to engage in throughout the month. How can you support women and girls in need right now? Each month, millions of women and girls suffer the indignity of not having adequate menstrual supplies. Our response? Dignity Grows was founded by the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford's Women's Philanthropy, and it empowers women who are experiencing period poverty by providing them with personal hygiene supplies so they can attend school and work uninterrupted. Our teens will help launch this project here as part of Community Mitzvah Month by packing these products for clients of our partner agencies. You can donate to support this project directly. If you have any questions, you can speak with a professional or our board member, Terry Friedman, who chairs the Center for Volunteerism. We also want to share with you a virtual heart-to-heart mission to Israel, which National Women's Philanthropy is launching in late April. This will be an incredible virtual mission for women all across America with Leanna Rothstein, a tour guide that many of us in Women's Philanthropy love and have traveled with in person in Israel. There will be more information to come on the Heart-to-Heart mission, and we hope you will all be there so we can all virtually travel to Israel together soon. We will email everyone the link to all these exciting programs and the National Women's Philanthropy mission to Israel. Stay tuned. Thank you all for a wonderful discussion and for joining us this evening. We will keep our Zoom room open for those who would like to stay on and visit. Feel free to unmute yourselves to chat. We look forward to seeing you soon and hope that you all stay safe.